get to be any little thing that we want to be. No matter what comes our way, we'll be together, together.
Welcome to Homeschooling Down South. I'm Kayla.
And I'm Kat. We're two Southern homeschooling mamas sharing real talk, resources, and inspiration for life and learning in the Southeast.
Each week, we'll chat with inspiring voices in the homeschool community, highlight must-see nature spots and field trip gems, and share resources from across the region.
Whether you're new to homeschooling or a seasoned pro, pull up a chair and join us as we celebrate the joy, freedom, and community of homeschooling down south.
We'll laugh together, we'll learn together, find the joys in life together, give each other grace and space to be.
Happy New Year, listeners. This is our first programming episode of the new year, but it's also our first episode of 2026. And we just wanted to take a moment to say Happy New Year. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. This is a great episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. And we hope you'll stay tuned with us for all of 2026.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, it's a little bit different down here at Homeschooling Down South. I am flying solo. Kat is under the weather, but that does not change the fact that we are so excited to have Robert from Excalibur Solutions STEM Academy with us. Kat actually met him at the Southeast Homeschool Expo. And Robert, we're just so excited to chat with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Kayla. I'm excited as well.
Yeah, and I will share with you, although I did not run into you this year, I have encountered you guys before, and you've been on my radar for my son. He's only 6, but we thought he was going to be our football star. But as it turns out, he's our STEM guy for sure.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we've got some exciting things in the pipeline. We're trying to push our content down a little bit younger even. Currently, it's sort of at the 8 or 9-year-old third grade range, but we're trying now to push it down and make it accessible to even younger kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, let's talk about Excalibur, how it came to be, and
Sure.
what it is now. I would love for you to talk about
Yeah.
that.
So I got started in my career in education. I have a bachelor's degree in secondary math education, and I taught in the Gwinnett County Public School System for 3 years when I first got started in 1991. So it was a very long time ago. I didn't stay in teaching very long. Anybody who has taught in the classroom knows that there's a lot of not teaching in teaching. And that's a reason why a lot of people choose to homeschool. There's just a lot of things that go on in schools that really doesn't relate directly to our children's education. And so that was a little frustrating for me. So I left the school system and started working in technology. And I did a number of different jobs, kind of bounced from role to role at different companies. Finally got settled into a company that did computer software for public library systems. So when you think about going to a public library, you think about paying for print jobs or having to sign up for time on the computer, checking out your own books with, RFID based checkout systems. And so we did all of those software systems and we're really quite successful. We grew from a company that started with just a handful of employees up to a high of around 50 or so. We even had an office in Australia for a little while.
Wow.
And so I did that for around 12 years, 13 years. And my role over that time kind of changed from being the very hands-on technical person to being more of the corner office CEO. And that's just not my style. I love to be in the middle of stuff. I loved writing the code, testing the code, talking to the customers and all that. So I left and started doing independent contracting and consulting work for a while. And then when my own children were of the age to start thinking about college, kind of finishing their high school career, we didn't homeschool our kids, but we did send them to a small private school. And so they got a great education, but it was a very traditional education. And they didn't have hands-on access to computer science and engineering classes, and they didn't develop those interests. So even though that's what I did at home, they didn't do it for themselves. And so when they were looking for majors, they didn't think about STEM-related fields. They're both doing great in the fields they have chosen, so it's really not a problem, but that made me sort of step back for a minute I mentioned Gwinnett County, that's where I live, and we have a fantastic school system here. They have tremendous opportunities and resources for kids, particularly in STEM fields. They have, I think, 3 or 4 STEM charter schools where the
Oh,
whole
wow.
school revolves around STEM. They have a number of schools that have what's called a STEM Academy, where it's an opt in program where the kids go to, they have block scheduling instead of hour-long classes. So they spend all morning doing a project, and you can't tell when they're doing language arts or when they're doing chemistry because it's all about how can we make the air cleaner in the local park. So I realize that where and how we choose to educate our children dictates so much of the opportunities that they have access to, and then those opportunities breed their future interests. So if we don't give the kids chances to do STEM for themselves, the likelihood that they're going to want to pursue that in college or as a career is greatly diminished. Not everybody should go into STEM. It's not right for everybody. Everybody should at least have the chance to experience it for themselves and make an informed decision about whether that's a good thing for their future. It also doesn't hurt that STEM helps build what are called 21st century skills, problem solving, logical thinking, communication. All of those are things that you have to do what's called project based learning. And so those skills are applicable no matter what career field you go into. So even if they decide they don't want to go into a STEM field, they're still going to learn things that are going to help them in the business world no matter where they go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So is that when you got to that point, is that when Excalibur was born or did that come later?
Yeah. So it's about 5 or 6 years ago when I started kind of thinking about what shape the Excalibur Solutions STEM Academy should take and sort of settled on 2 audiences. One is the homeschool market. And for homeschool families, what we create is self paced, self directed video lesson content that teaches computer programming, electronics, 3D modeling, and other things that fall into specifically the technology and engineering fields within STEM. And if people don't know, most people do, but STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math, and it's an integrated approach to those subjects. So if you think about how traditional school is done, you have an hour of math, you have an hour of science. You probably don't have technology or engineering as a separate class, but the other subjects are all siloed. So when you're doing math, you're doing math.
Right.
And kids often ask questions like, does spelling count on this assignment? Because this isn't language arts. But that's not how we solve problems in the real world. We have to use our collective experiences and knowledge and skills and all of those things that we've learned to solve a problem. You can't look at a problem and say, oh, yeah, this is clearly a math problem. There's probably some science to it. You're probably going to have to maybe draw a picture or communicate to someone else what you want done. And so that's what STEM is. It's an interdisciplinary project-based approach that attempts to create what are called authentic real-world learning contexts. And so, yeah, that's when we started doing what we do. I mentioned that we do the video content for homeschool families so they can do it at their own pace and on their own schedule. But we also work with homeschool co-op groups and with private schools or smaller rural schools to teach interactive classes. So we can jump on Zoom, we can have an hour-long class every day, once a week, once a month, whatever, to teach those same subjects, but in an interactive fashion with a live instructor who's just not physically present.
I love that you, at the onset, you had homeschoolers in mind because a lot of the programming that we see and even the experiences that we talk about, it was already in place. And then they saw a need for homeschoolers. But that's really awesome that you went into this with that aspect in
Yeah.
mind. So I'm
Well,
super grateful for that.
I also recognize, and as an organization, we recognize that um, not everybody has a technical background. And so even when our kids were in private school, they were being asked to use technologies that sometimes challenged us as parents. And I am about as technical as you can get, right? So if I was struggling to help my kids set up the printer so they could print whatever or access this online application so they could do their homework, I know it had to be tough for people who don't have that technical background and aren't as comfortable with technology as I am. So that was a big part of what we tried to do, recognizing that homeschool parents have all sorts of backgrounds, and not all of them have been computer programmers or engineers. So those are the subjects that they're going to tend to shy away from. They're going to be a little more intimidated by. So we want to help them find good resources. We want to be able to provide the instruction that they may not be comfortable in providing to their own children.
We've talked about this with some other folks as well, but I talk a lot about outsourcing on my platform because
Yeah.
I'm an artsy kid. I did theater. I'm in the kitchen, creating meals and stuff like that. And so I struggle with some things. And the benefit of homeschooling is not that you have to do it all on your own, but you get to decide who is teaching your child. And so I am not, as evidenced, I'll just give myself away. I was struggling with technology today because Kat is usually our producer. I can hook up a Roku device and plug in a USB or something, but my son's going to need some extra help. And that's why when I
Yeah.
first saw you guys, I was so intrigued because, at 6 years old, he's already solving things and making things work together that just blow my mind away. So I love that this is a way to outsource this thing when you see a passion in your kiddo that you can send them here.
Yeah, and you actually brought up a really good point when you said, "Well, I can hook up a Roku," right? So we actually classify people into 2 categories. You are a technology consumer or you are a technology producer.
Yeah.
And so you are the consumer. You
Yes.
know how to get things done with some of the technologies that you use, but you don't know how they work.
Right.
And when they break, you struggle to fix them. So if as a society, we reach a point where the consumers vastly outnumber the producers, we're in trouble
Yeah.
because we're going to become dependent, and we already are to some extent. We're dependent on technologies that some of us don't fully understand. Even the technical people sometimes don't fully understand because the complexity has gotten to be so great. So it's really, really important that we continue to build a generation that can step into those roles. They understand how it works and they're able to see how they can expand on it or innovate from it to create the technologies of the future. Or else we're going to become dependent on technology we can't support
Yeah.
and we're going to become stagnant.
Yeah. Well, as a technology consumer, not a producer, I do want to ask, and I'm hoping that I'm not the only one out there who doesn't know this. Can you talk about the difference? I've heard a couple different words. I've heard STEM, I've heard STEAM, and I've heard
Yes.
STREAM. So can
Yes.
you speak to a little bit
Yes, I
what's the
can.
differences?
So I explained that STEM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? So the idea and the acronym came around in the late 80s, sort of 80s, 90s timeframe. And this may not resonate well with some people, but it's an initiative by the government, a recognition that our kids were not getting the well-rounded education that kids in other countries might be getting. And so we were falling behind, particularly in technology and engineering. So it was a kind of an initiative by the government to encourage students and schools to teach more integrated subject matter, right? And the original acronym was actually SMET, SMET. And
So glad we changed that.
I think she was in the Department of Education, but her name was Judith Ramley. She said, "That doesn't sound good. Let's make it STEM." And so that's where the origin of STEM comes from. All right. So that became the initiative. Let's like everything together the way that we do in the real world. Well, some people then got upset and concerned that, well, if we're going to put all this emphasis on technology and engineering, what's going to happen to the arts and the
Mhm.
people like you that want to do theater and the people who want to do painting and drawing and all that stuff? We're going to lose all those skills. That's where the A comes in. It's arts. Now we
Okay.
can incorporate art into STEM and not just art in the drawing painting sense, but the arts as in music and theater and video production and all the other things you think of in sort of entertainment and so on. So it was an explicit intent to not short shrift arts when we start focusing on technology and engineering. And if you think about theater, there's a lot of STEM in theater, right? You got
Yeah.
to run the lights, you got to have the music and the cues and all those things, and somebody's got to understand how that works just as much as the actors have to know their lines and their stage directions. So you mentioned stream. Now this is where it gets fun for me because stream, the R is reading. So someone felt that if we're
Mm.
going to explicitly indicate that we should incorporate arts, then what about reading? Okay, I think we've gone a step too far when we get to stream because, all right, well, if you're going to say reading, where's writing?
Yeah.
The problem with writing is that it doesn't make a nice acronym. So honestly, I think we went from STEM to STEAM, and I kind of buy that justification. When we went to stream, it was just somebody who said, "Hey, I can throw another letter in and still make a word." I like to joke a lot when people talk about STREAM. It's like, well, you're just back to school, because now you've got all the subjects again,
Yeah.
right? And so I personally don't necessarily feel the need to differentiate STEAM, STEM, and STREAM. But I do recognize that we need all of those things. So when I talk about STEM, I'm not talking about STEM minus the arts.
Right.
If we can incorporate arts, that's fantastic. And we actually have some projects in our library where kids are learning to program, but at the same time, they're telling a story like they would be doing in language arts, or they're drawing a picture like they would be doing in an art class, but they're doing it by giving instructions to a virtual pencil to say, put yourself down and move so many units and then rotate and move so many more units. So you're doing art, but you're doing
Yeah.
it in a programming context.
That's so cool. My brain cannot even fathom that. But I love that my brain can't fathom it, but I now have a way to, like, introduce my children to that, you know?
Yeah. Can I say
So
one more thing about sort of the names here?
oh, yeah, for
So STEM and STEAM both tend to be a buzzword. And this is a frustrating thing for parents who don't really understand technology and engineering because everything gets labeled STEM or STEAM, right? This is a STEM project. This is a STEAM project. So as a parent, you have to be a little leery and you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt and do a little bit more research because there's a lot of things labeled STEM that I wouldn't necessarily classify as STEM the way I think about it, interdisciplinary project-based instruction. I'll give two examples. One is like a dissecting a frog. Dissecting a frog is something we've all done in science for probably hundreds of years. That's not STEM, that's just biology. All
okay.
right. We're not blending multiple subjects together. So I would call that single subject STEM, right?
Okay.
It's just science. You can buy these kits where you put dirt in a little plastic container and you put ants in it and you watch the ants build their colony. That too is just science, right?
Okay.
There's really no STEM involved there. Now, if you went out to the backyard and you wanted to build a garden and you had to think about how am I going to stake out the corners of my garden? What area should my garden have? How many plants do I want to put in it? What are the needs of each of the plants? How am I going to water them? How am I going to make sure they get enough sun? Do I need to put some artificial lights or some artificial watering in? Now you've turned it into a STEM project because you're now having to incorporate really some engineering and think about how all these different requirements and constraints are going to become connected. The second kind of STEM that you have to watch out for is what I call crafty STEM. So you've probably seen it like Michael's or other craft stores, these
Uh-huh.
little robot kits where you take a tin can and you put some wheels on it and a little vibrating motor and it wobbles across the table. Or the ones where they say, we're going to take a water bottle and we're going to stick fins on it and a little, construction paper nose cone. Okay, those are just craft projects. You're
Yeah.
really not learning anything about technology or engineering with either of those things. But again, if you take the water bottle, yeah, let's go ahead and put cardboard and construction paper and decorate it and all that so it looks like a rocket. But then let's find out how we can launch it. And then let's measure how far does it fly? How can we make it fly farther or faster or stay in the air longer or whatever? All right. So now you actually have turned it into something that has a more context than just we made a water bottle into a rocket.
Okay.
Even building a little wind tunnel and measuring the aerodynamic flow over the surfaces.
Yeah, that makes sense. You want there to be a piece of it. It can't just be the S, it can't just be the T. It needs to be all of them together. That
Yeah,
makes a
and
lot
it
of
definitely can't
sense.
just be the A
Right.
without any of the others.
Right. So tell me what if I have a child and I want to sign up, what is that gonna look like? What is that library gonna look like?
Yep,
How would is my child gonna need to spend an hour every day, 2 hours every day? What does that look like if someone wants to be a part of Excalibur?
sure, and we have 2 different ways that people can become part of our family, so to speak. One is through what we call a subscription,
Okay.
and that can be monthly or annually. And when you sign up for that, you have access to all of the projects that we have inside of that library and any new projects that we add to it. So that's like an all access pass. The projects internally are divided into 2 grade level sections. So we have an elementary section that right now we consider roughly 3rd through 6th grade. And then we have a middle and high section, so roughly 7th through 12th grade. But those are soft boundaries. So if you have a super advanced 5th grader and they're ready to do some Python programming, then all, jump into the content library. It's basically what do they want to do? So it's a very unstructured program. It's just access to lots of different projects that cover different areas of technology. So computer programming, electronics, 3D modeling, a little bit with sound, a little bit with light, things like that. So you have the all access approach. We also are beginning to sell the individual projects standalone.
Okay.
So if you really like this particular Scratch programming project that we have, then that is available as a single project. So the single projects tend to cost like around $10 or less. The subscription is $19.99 a month or $199 a year.
That's awesome. So structurally, if you do the subscription, you said it's kind of at your own pace. So you choose the project and,
That's right.
as the parent, we decide how much time we're spending on this a day.
Exactly, and we have some guidelines. So, like, for an elementary student, we might recommend, 30 minutes 3 times a week, so maybe it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday thing. The lessons at that age range are, generally 5 to 8-minute long videos, and the student is probably gonna spend 15 to 20 minutes total completing that 5 to 8-minute video. So they're gonna watch the video, they're gonna follow along with the instructions. They may have to go back and rewatch part of it, or it may not work right the first time, and they may have to figure out what to do. So, I would say that you do that maybe 3 times a week for a 3rd or a 4th grader. As they get older, you might transition it more to an everyday, maybe all the way up to an hour a day, almost like an elective, like you would have for any other kind of an
Yeah.
elective. For the high school age students, we also have a guide that we will provide for free that we call a scope and sequence guide. We're working on more than these, but right now we have just the one. And it basically represents a little bit like a curriculum. It sort of puts some structure around the otherwise unstructured program, and it identifies a specific set of projects that are geared for that age range. That if you were doing it as a 1 hour a day class, it should roughly take 15, 16, 17 weeks. So roughly a semester's worth of work. But then we also have shown you what computer science skills and objectives have they learned from doing that set of projects, as well as what applied math and applied science skills they've learned. So generally, and it varies by state, but the states usually put the parent in charge of creating the transcript. And so what we're doing is providing you with some information that is supporting justification for granting an elective course credit on the transcript.
That's awesome. And I saw on your website, I was poking around on your website, I
Yeah.
saw that people can use scholarships, the state scholarships that are coming
Yes.
out, that they can use that for Excalibur. That's amazing. How does something like that work?
Sure. So obviously, it depends on the state, and every state's requirements are different. It's actually so different that it becomes a little frustrating on my side, but we won't get into that so much. Yeah. So, Louisiana, we're approved in Louisiana. We're approved as a vendor in Georgia. We don't yet have any of our offerings approved. Usually, it's a 2-step process where you have to be first approved as a company that they feel like fits with the program. And then you have to have the individual projects approved or the products approved. And so we're still waiting on the products for Georgia. It's a little bit clunky because you
Sure.
have this category system you have to fit into, and finding what category you belong in that they approve is a hit and miss exercise. So when we're approved in Florida as well, let's see, other southeastern states, we just got a notice that we'll be approved in Tennessee. So we're just getting the process started with Tennessee. I think that's it for the Southeast: Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee. We're also approved in Utah and Wyoming, Arkansas, Arizona, and New Hampshire. But the way it works is that those states give money to families that are pursuing non-traditional education, which includes both private school in some cases and homeschool. So they can use that for tuition, curriculum, whatever. The states are different. Some of them you pay out of pocket and then you submit for reimbursement, and we will provide you with the invoice that shows what you spent with us, and then you would submit that to get paid back. Sometimes you get to buy it from their own marketplace. So you log into a portal, you have your funds available there. You can actually shop in the portal, put it in the cart, purchase it, and all the finance part of it's handled behind the scenes.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's
I
great.
love
It's a
that.
great program. It's a great program.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, I know a lot of homeschool families tend to, be more, we want to be outside and we don't want our kids on screens. What's your response to a family that says, I don't know about putting my kid on
Yeah,
screens for
absolutely.
this? I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, so there are studies that show that kids are spending way too much time online. Most of these studies are studying kids who go to a traditional school where a lot of their schoolwork is done in the classroom and at home using a device of some kind. But we're talking about, 8, 9, 10 hours a day on a device. So yeah, that is something that parents should be concerned about. The way that we approach that is that the parent needs to differentiate what we consider productive screen time from unproductive screen time.
Yes.
So unproductive screen time is the thing that you would use as a reward or a brain break or something like that. That might include social media, video games, etc., watching TV. Productive screen time is you're learning something through the process. You're developing skills. So through our program, not only are you learning the technical skills associated with constructing an electrical circuit or writing a computer program, but you're also learning how to use an online application, right? You're having to navigate through the course and the videos and play the video and pause it and maybe make it full screen, maybe divide your screen into two halves so you can see the video on one side and what you're doing on the other side. You're learning to use applications like Scratch and Tinkercad, doing some of the more complex programs. You've downloaded some software to your own computer and you've had to learn how to do that and install it and then use it. You're having to learn how to navigate the file system. So yes, you're using a computer, but you're doing it in a way that's building actual tangible skills that are necessary when you get into the workplace.
Yeah, and
So we would say, maximize productive screen time
yes.
and use the unproductive screen time more sparingly.
Yeah, and I think, as much as we want our kids not to be on screens and all that, the fact of the matter is we are a society heavy in technology, and we also want our kids to be prepared to be in the workplace, to be, I like to say I'm not raising children, I already have them, I'm raising adults. So I
Yes.
want them to be productive adults, and we tell our kids, "Hey, we're not going to push college. If you want to go into welding, let's help you get on that path." And I consider the coding and the engineering, that's a trade. That's
Yeah.
something we need in our society. We need people to be proficient in that. So if that is where my child's interests lie, let's go down that path and let's give them what they need to pursue that.
Yeah. So there's a study by the National Skills Coalition that says that 92% of today's job requires some form of digital literacy. So, you think about jobs that used to be available that you could sort of avoid having to do technology, right? You could be a plumber, you could be an electrician, you could be an HVAC technician. Those just required you to know your craft, go to the job site, get the job done, and then you came back and you filled out some paperwork and you sent it into billing and they took care of the invoicing and all that. But it's not like that anymore. Those people come to your house with a tablet. The tablet is their work order. They take digital pictures of their work. They fill out their report while they're there in your house, finishing up the job. You sign all the forms, you pay them. They are still using technology in the field every day. They have to know what to do if they can't connect to the server to upload their documents. They have to know what to do if the credit card transaction doesn't go through. So there are very few jobs today that you can get where you can completely avoid having to use technology in any form.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, others, the flip side of that, with this recent uptick in what we're seeing with AI, tell me, how does that
Yeah.
affect what we're doing in these STEM environments for our kids?
So AI is a really, really interesting sort of development in the field of technology. And this is certainly an area where I think we are at risk of trying to use something that we don't yet fully understand, and we don't know what the ramifications of using it will be. So AI is a very, very interesting area right now. I think it's great for some things. I think that right now AI is pretty good at things, and this is going to surprise some people. It's good at things that require creativity. It's good at things like brainstorming. It's good at being a sounding board for you to bounce ideas off of. It's almost like a substitute for another individual when you don't have someone to collaborate with on certain kinds of projects. What it's not particularly good at right now are things that require a high degree of precision or accuracy. Surprisingly, it doesn't do math all that well. I don't really understand that. And also somewhat surprisingly, it has a tendency to do what's called hallucinate. Now we know what hallucinate means in everyday life. It means to see something that isn't there.
Right.
When AI hallucinates, it means that it looked at your question, it couldn't find a suitable answer for you, and so it made one up. Now, as a programmer, that's a hard thing for me to understand. Just real quickly on kind of how AI works. AI doesn't think, it doesn't reason the way we as humans think and reason. It basically has access to an immense amount of data and information. So essentially, it's looking at your question and it's looking to see how many times has that question or a question like that been asked in the past, and what answers were given when that similar question was asked in the past. And then it groups them and it says, well, these were all similar and these were similar and these were similar. So it picks the one that was given the most often and says, well, that's probably the answer to your question. And that's what it tries to give you back as the answer. But as I said, if it doesn't find a good answer, it makes one up. So there was this case in New York. It was a law firm in New York that was using AI to write legal briefs. Now, legal briefs have to be submitted to the court ahead of a hearing or a trial or whatever, and the court clerk is responsible for reading the briefs and doing the research and checking the citations and seeing how it relates to the argument. And then they summarize that for the judge. Well, the clerk couldn't find the citations that were in the brief. And so they found out that the lawyers were using ChatGPT to write the briefs, and it was making up court cases that didn't exist.
Oh my
And they had
gosh.
submitted these to the court. So the lawyers got in trouble. They got sanctioned. They had to apologize to all the courts to which they'd submitted these briefs. Stanford University has done a study and summarized that approximately 16% of queries, particularly those in a legal context, are hallucinations. So 1 in every 6 results in a made-up answer. One more quick example. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of the podcasts I listened to was a guy who happened to know a whole lot about the history of the development of the iPad. And so he was sort of testing AI and saying, hey, when did iPad first get a USB-C interface to it? And AI gave him an answer. Because of his deep technical knowledge in that particular subject area, he knew it was wrong. And so he challenged AI and said, but didn't this previous version also have USBs? Oh, yes, you're absolutely right. I don't know what I was thinking. Yes, that previous version did have USB-C. So he asked it another question. It got that one wrong too. He challenged it again, and it starts being kind of flippant and said, oh, gosh, I guess my circuits are crossed. I don't know what's going on. You're absolutely right. But what he drew from that was, number one, a layperson asking those questions isn't going to do the research to say, did it give me a good answer?
Right.
It's just going to take it at face value because the answer was given authoritatively. Not like, well, I really don't know, but I think it was like, it was this version. It was this model. And so when somebody tells you something authoritatively, you tend to take it at face value, right? He happened to have a depth of knowledge that made him an expert in that area, and he knew those answers were wrong, but most people won't, and most people then won't go check the work. So it is very, very important that you don't take an answer from ChatGPT and accept it. You should go and try to find, like a journalist would, go find separate sources to verify that that is in fact the answer before you accept it as face value. But so I
Wow.
think we got a long way to go that we're going to have to decide as a society. Self-driving cars, they're using AI to make decisions about what to do. And so if you have a car accident in a self-driving car, is the person sitting behind the wheel responsible? Is the company that built the car responsible? Is the company that did the AI responsible? Are the individual developers who wrote the software responsible? I don't think we know.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, I think we're letting AI get ahead of us
Yeah.
in some respects.
Well, it seems to me that's how technology has become. I mean, I was in high school when we had this boom of all the iPhone comes out, the iPad comes out, all this stuff. And I just feel like it has moved so fast. It sometimes can be really hard to keep up. And because I didn't learn it at my son's age, because it wasn't a thing, I almost feel like I lack a little proficiency that way. But that's why I think it's so important for my kids. And I have a question I want to ask you in just a second about my daughter, but I think that's why it's so important for our kids at this young age, as their brains are still developing, to start learning this stuff so that it's like, oh, well, I've been doing this since the third grade. I'm growing with it. And so I wanted to ask, my daughter is not my STEM minded kiddo. So but I want her to still have some proficiency. So how do I go about helping her and I'm not saying she has to pursue it, but you just need
No,
some
no.
proficiency in it.
Sure. And that's where I think we're in a good place in sort of today's society. The way programming used to be taught, it really turned off people who weren't minded in that direction, who weren't technical people, right? If you think about if you ever took a college class in the 90s or the early 2000s, and even today to some extent, you're going to get a lot of theory on day one. Here is what a variable is, and here are all the different data types it can have, and here is the size that each data type requires inside the computer's memory. And, here's how we store integers, here's how we store floating point numbers, and all. It's just overwhelming, and then you got to learn the language and you got to type out everything. And if there's just one little character out of place, it's all wrong. And you got to spend all this time debugging it. That turns off a lot of people, right? So we have tools today like Scratch. Scratch is a block-based programming language. It was developed at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, designed to make it easier for beginners to learn how to program. But what's cool about Scratch is that there's no typing. And you don't have to remember all the words in the language. They're all just puzzle pieces. They're color-coded blocks that you pull over here and you snap them together and you put them in the sequence. But the other really great thing about it is that it's completely graphical. So you're not writing a program that outputs characters to the screen and you have to read it and you have to type, your answer back in. You're seeing a little cat on the screen and you get to make the cat move around, and you can animate the cat and all these other characters. They're called sprites, and you can do all this really neat stuff with it. So even people who traditionally weren't really or were turned off by programming might really enjoy working in Scratch because they can do things that are creative and colorful and have motion and have sound. And, like you can tell a whole story. You can draw pictures. You can write your own video games, and they're not hard to do
That's cool.
because the programming language is so much more accessible. So, I think that even people traditionally who thought, oh, I don't want to program, that's just too much for me to learn. Things like Scratch have made it just much easier, or the barrier to entry,
Yeah.
made it more accessible for people who aren't interested in learning a whole new language in that way, who don't have the patience to go in and debug it, to look for the missing semicolon or whatever. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I would encourage you to, let her check out some of those types of activities, which are programming, but not in the traditional sense.
Yeah, I feel like my generation, we were almost there because, I remember going in on MySpace and tweaking things to get my MySpace to look a certain way. Man, I was almost there. If I'd have stuck with that, maybe I could have learned because the
Yeah.
Scratch thing sounds so cool and sounds like something my daughter would actually really enjoy doing. And I don't think she would even register what it was that she was really learning to do?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can sort of sneak in the back door when you have these fun tools to work with. A lot of our projects are the student ends up building a game of some kind because games are naturally engaging. They're fun. They give us a reason to want to finish it because there's this thing at the end I want to do. But games also have a lot of logic and they have a lot of math. So even though you think you're building a game, you're really learning geometry and you're really learning,
Mm.
like, for example, tic-tac-toe. All right. Tic-tac-toe is a pretty boring game. But if you want the computer to play tic-tac-toe against you and be a worthy opponent, then you have to analyze how you play tic-tac-toe because we don't think about it when we play. Our minds are just so well developed that we can look at the board and intuitively understand where we should play almost without thinking about it. But if you want the computer to think like you, to pick the same square you would pick and be, like I said, a worthy opponent, you have to start thinking about what is the best move I could make, right? Based on this board. How do I know whether that move is available to me right now? So now you've got to sort of model the game board in some sort of a mathematical way and be able to analyze it and say, where can I find 2 plus an empty, 2 that match plus an empty? Because that's either a win or a block.
Right.
All right. And that's the most important move we can make. You even can start looking at, the strategy where you try to take 2 opposite corners so you can get the
Yes.
third. And, so you actually get to the point where you say, how can the computer identify that you're trying to do that to the computer, and then what should the computer do to prevent you from doing that, to foil that strategy.
Sure.
You really have to start thinking about things that you don't think about,
Yeah.
when you play tic-tac-toe. The guess the number game, right? Another
Yeah.
really simple, boring game. You don't think about how you choose when you're the guesser, but if you want the computer to be the guesser, what strategy do you want to use? Well, it turns out that if you really know how to play that game, the best strategy, it's not always the one that results in the fewest number of guesses to guess the number, but the optimal strategy is to pick the middle of the remaining range, right? So if I said, let's play between 1 and 100, the best first guess is 50 because we've divided the space in half. And then I know it's either below or above 50. So then I can divide it again. The next best guess would be 25 or 75. And I keep dividing the space in half. Well, it turns out that strategy that we would use in Guess the Number is the same strategy you use if you're searching a database with 1 million records in it, as long as the records are sorted for finding one piece of information, because you're always eliminating half of the possible options. So, like I said, it doesn't result in the least number of guesses every time, but it results in the best worst case scenario. You can never do worse than dividing it in half every time. If you were guessing, like, well, it's 1 to 100, so I'll guess 1. No, you're too low. It's
Right.
2. All right. That's 100 guesses if the number were 100. So the worst case is you had to guess all 100 numbers. If you do it in dividing it in half, your worst case is the optimal worst case.
Well, and I think in just listening to you explain that, that's a ton of critical thinking that you're building.
It is.
You're building some really
Yes.
good critical thinking skills that are going to then apply in other areas of your life.
Yeah. Writing a computer program is nothing more than giving directions for how to do something,
Yeah.
right? So if you're trying to explain to your son, your 6-year-old son, how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you know, there's a whole lot of steps. And you find that we can give instructions to other humans in high level terms because the other human can infer certain things that you might leave out, but the computer cannot.
Right.
There's this really funny YouTube video. If you go search for dad peanut butter jelly sandwich, he's playing a game with his kids and he's having them write out the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then he's trying to be as literal as possible following those instructions. And it's just hilarious to see the kids attempting to tell him how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and the way he interprets the instructions. But it's a great example for how precise you have to be. And so I personally believe that learning any kind of computer programming will make you a better problem solver. But if you learn text-based programming, it will make you a better writer, right? Because a programming language is a language. It has a grammar, a syntax, a vocabulary, just like any language does. The difference is that you and I can speak English pretty badly. Somebody once told me English is the easiest language to speak badly and still be understood. We can make our subjects and verbs disagree. We can get the tense wrong. You'll still get my point.
Right.
Texting and email prove that. But if you want to write a Python program, it has to be exactly right, right? You have to choose the correct word. There usually isn't a synonym. There's usually no other choice. There's one word to do what you want. You have to spell it correctly. You have to capitalize it correctly. You have to use the punctuation correctly, or your program isn't going to work. If you do any of those things wrong and you get an error, now you have to go through a proofreading step to find the error. Those are all things we do in a non-technical context when we write anything. So it's my opinion, and I haven't done any studies to bear this out, but it's my opinion that the more we do that, the more sensitive we become to word choice, to proper spelling, proper capitalization, proper punctuation, so that now when you're writing that English term paper, you're just thinking more about your writing than you would if you hadn't had any kind of programming.
Yeah, I love that. And I wanted to also ask, because I love how the STEM stuff can bleed over into other areas. A lot of us homeschooling are doing it from a biblical worldview, from a biblical perspective. And for us, we chose the curriculum we did because every piece of the curriculum, math, science, language arts, comes from a biblical worldview. Can you speak a little to just how a STEM education would fit into that?
Yeah. So STEM is kind of interesting in that it's one of the subjects that is fairly easy to separate from your perspective or your worldview or your value system if it's important for you to do that,
Right.
right? So it doesn't require that you adopt any particular worldview, and the worldview doesn't really influence the outcome of STEM because it at the core, STEM is based on physical principles, right? The
Sure.
speed of light is the speed of light. But the Bible and God as our creator gave us humans the ability to reason, to analyze, to understand. And it's that allows us to study technology and engineering, right? So without that knowledge, without that ability, without that wisdom, then all of this stuff would be meaningless to
Yeah.
us, right? So, I think there's a couple of verses I can quote. Romans 1:20, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have clearly been seen, being understood from what has been made, right? So it's God as our creator who gives us the abilities to pursue these different subjects. And that's how I would say that the two relate, that STEM and the biblical worldview can interrelate, interact.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, we like to wrap up here by asking you about a win. And so I want to know, do you have an Excalibur win, something, a moment where you have just seen like, man, this program is doing exactly what I wanted it to do?
I do. I actually have two. I'll share
Okay.
really quickly. And they
Yeah.
actually involve both Excalibur Solutions STEM Academy and a nonprofit organization that I also operate called Dart STEM Services. So Excalibur Solutions STEM Academy is a service provider. We do the instruction, we provide the videos, but Dart STEM Services is more of a organization that tries to match needs and funding. Right. So there was a student who came to a workshop that I delivered at one of the Teach Them Diligently conferences. All right. So I'll do like
Yeah.
pre-conference workshop for teens where we do a programming activity, a 2 or 3 hour session. And he came to my class. His mom told me ahead of time, he's never used a computer before. This will be his first chance. He's so excited. Well, unfortunately, we had tons of technical issues in that particular class. I had just reloaded my computers with new software, and the software really didn't take well, and we had issues, and he had a lot of them. So I told the mom, I thought he was frustrated. He looked like he was frustrated. I told the mom at the end, I'm so sorry. He had a bunch of technical issues, and I really feel bad that that happened. Well, I followed up with her after the conference and I said, again, I want to tell you how sorry we are that your son had these issues. And can I offer you a subscription to our content as a result? She said, well, first of all, he had a great time. He loved it. It's almost like he didn't even notice he was having these technical issues. He just had a great time using the computer. And she said, well, we'd love to accept your offer, but we live in a part of Kentucky where we don't have broadband internet access. So the only
Oh,
internet I have is through my data plan on my phone. So we really can't do online classes. So here's where the nonprofit comes in. We take in donations of computer equipment from companies that are recycling them, for their salespeople. Those laptops tend to be 3 to 5 years old. They got a ton of life left in them. They
yeah.
just need a little TLC, right? So we had just received a donation of 23 laptops. And so we took one, we re-imaged it, we loaded it up with a whole bunch of open source software and a lot of our content, our videos, and sent it to him so that he could do these online classes, but without having to be online. And so that is a win for us because we put the ability in his hands to pursue these things, even though there were technical constraints or limitations that would otherwise have prevented him from doing it. And so, mom, I reached out to mom recently and she said, oh gosh, he's so proud of his computer. He takes it everywhere he goes. So it was a great
Oh
thing.
my gosh, that's amazing.
We had another subscriber who's actually lives in New Zealand, and he wants to be an engineer, but mom was struggling with the subscription, and so we gifted him a subscription and bought him an electronics kit so that now not only can he do the online lessons that involve virtual electrical circuits, he can actually take the kit and build the circuits with actual parts, and so that was another one where he has now the opportunity to do some things that he wasn't going to be able to do
That's
for whatever
amazing.
reason. Circumstances were preventing him from having that. So, those are why we do what we do, and it's just the opportunity that arises of the combination of my for-profit company and my nonprofit company to be in a position to do those things.
That's incredible. I love I love this nonprofit And we're going to link all the things in the show notes, but we will definitely, I want to
Fantastic.
link to how, if people want to partner with you guys in that, if they have the
Sure.
technology to donate, because that is amazing. I've never gotten weepy on this podcast so far, but I did
Yeah,
get
I
a
have a
little
hard time
teary
talking
eyed.
about those things sometimes without tearing up a little myself.
And you mentioned Teach Them Diligently. So you've done Southeast Homeschool Expo. You do Teach Them
Yep.
Diligently. Are there any
Yeah, as
other
a matter of
conferences
fact,
that people can see you at?
sure. We actually focus most of our marketing efforts in the Southeast because
Okay.
we're here. They're the
Yeah.
easiest ones for us to get to. We take so much stuff with us that we tend to drive. So it's easier, to stay in this general area. But next year, we will be at Teach Them Diligently in Pigeon Forge.
Okay.
We will be at FPEA in Orlando.
Okay.
We will be at the Southeast Homeschool Expo again. We will be at the Home Educator Association of Virginia Conference in Richmond.
Okay.
Um, we Those are the southeastern ones.
Yeah.
We will be at one in Illinois, the Illinois Christian Homeschool Association Conference in Illinois next May. We will likely go out to Utah. Again, that's another one of the state scholarship programs that we participate in. In the Southeast, definitely Southeast Homeschool Expo, FPA in Orlando. Oh, we're going to do the Great Homeschool Conference, a Great Homeschool Convention in South Carolina,
Yay.
in Greenville. Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm excited. That'll be the first time that we did that when we did the GHC conference in Columbus, Ohio this past year.
Okay.
We will be going back to Cincinnati. They were renovating the Cincinnati Convention Center last year, so it was in Columbus. But we'll do both GHC in Greenville and in Cincinnati next year.
Okay. Well, it sounds like then we might get to see you a lot because we're hoping to do
That's
Teach Them
fantastic.
Diligently. Love GHC in Greenville. That's one of my favorites. And we also, of course, adore Southeast Homeschool Expo. So outside of
Yeah,
those.
ordinarily, we also do Teach Them Diligently in Branson,
Oh, okay.
but I have a personal conflict next year when my daughter's graduating law school, so
Oh,
can't miss that.
congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, outside of those conferences, where can people find you? What is the best way, whether it's social media, your website? How do people get in touch with you?
Sure. So we're on Facebook and Instagram at Excalibur STEM in both cases. Our website, stem.excalibur-solutions.com. Homeschool, big button on the homepage. Just click that. That'll take you to the homeschool stuff. If you're interested in the nonprofit, that's dartstem.org.
Okay, awesome. And we'll have all of those linked in the show notes. Again, you can find me personally at Scratch Made Simple. You can find us at Homeschooling Down South. And if you have a program that we should check out, if you have someone that we should talk to who's innovating big time in the homeschool space, email us at hello@homeschoolingdownsouth.com. And we would love it if you enjoyed today's episode, if you would go and leave us a 5-star rating and review. And we will see y'all next week.
And we'll love together, we'll learn together, explore this whole wide world together. No matter where we are, I have you, you have me, and today that's all